I recognize some of you guys from last year. The way we're gonna work this is I'll give you a situation, which I think everybody got a sheet when you walked in, and I want you to take 5-10 minutes and think about what you might do given the situation. And the idea is I want to be here, but I'm here, and how can I get there? And then after that, I'll kind of go through and give you my thoughts on the matter about that. So the first one we're going to talk about, and that's the way we'll do all three, and then I'll give you some handouts, things we can talk through. The first one is on cash flow. So who doesn't want to always know what your cash flow is going to be, right? And have it be predictable and projected out for not only the short term, but a quarter out, a couple months out, and even a year. And eventually you always need to know your cash flow, and we'll kind of get that to the end. But let's say today it's low to the point of concern. Maybe the bank is calling, you're worried about payroll, paying your vendors, all important things in business, right? Loan payments. So the question I want you guys to ponder for the next 5-10 minutes, and feel free to group up, and then we'll write your ideas here on the flip chart, is what do you do? How do you get a handle on this? How do you forecast your cash flow? What's important? So just take, like I said, 5-10 minutes, group up, and let me know your thoughts on what you can do to project cash flow for the next quarter. And if you got any questions, yell up here, and then we'll regroup in about 10 minutes, and we'll go through your ideas. And I got some handouts here too.
Is that how you act?
Same thing.
Take some lessons, okay? Because you're on the time to do
Sure.
Just say, swear hands, I'll take that photo. Oh, how sweet.
Two-part ring.
No, we're married. So what, it's sweet, the whole thing you did was really special. Yeah.
Look at our numbers.
She's crying, I would be crying.
No, not as much, no. She was just really.
Yeah, I mean, we
Yeah.
just,
I didn't
we need money, we're trying to gather to pay bills, and, you know, and
Well,
just
she
keep moving,
would
sell.
pick out the damn thing out of the bag, so.
Recycle things. I don't know. I'm interested in still work on after that, and how to forecast.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
On
Set goals,
that.
sales goals. And then
It's a twofer, right?
track it, and we have weekly sales.
How
meetings.
sweet, that was really, really nice story. That's sweet.
You know, planning for something and having that actually happen. You can try to forecast.
And you said what?
You know what's coming in the door, whether it's a week.
Yeah.
No, for normal people.
Yeah, October
How's it going?
has,
Good, how you doing?
has, the pink
What is
fevers
that?
called. Also, two different types. One's well, there's like a simulated.
You're not putting up
and then
big
there's an
expenditures out the door, you know,
general.
don't have that. So, like they'll
Yeah.
ask me, can I put the order in for this
Yeah.
brick or whatever? I said, well, how far out is the
Yeah.
job? The job's 2 months out, we're not putting in the order for the brick. So,
Well, then,
hold it until we absolutely have to put it out there. Until it gets closer to the job, because we have these jobs to pay for in the interim.
Well, I guess my role for a simple company, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys, is we put the terms of the payments based on the job. So it covers all the expenses. We're ahead on one job, no matter what. I'm always ahead. So I don't have, I do 6-ton class 5, but I can't buy it because I don't have cash.
I don't know,
One by day.
Mhm.
So,
looking at that.
in orange, that's what we do. But how to project it out, guess it's just tracking deposits for me.
oh, that's better than what we got. Ours is like,
That's
Right, yeah, he's not talking about he's trying to, he's just thinking of one way ahead.
all that.
In a good mindset.
Right, exactly.
You're gonna set a date though, right?
We use the line of credit. They are short. Get them the line of credit and then get that.
Yeah, right. That's really sweet.
What's the percentage
Yeah.
of that line of credit?
Went up to 7%.
Yeah, hopefully you don't.
Oh, at your mom's? Oh, I was gonna say Campbell.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a new tradition. Yeah, you know, these days,
You guys are all the same company?
you know, wear rings, don't wear rings.
And then what is your position?
As
You
an
manage the
individual company. Because
Like, no, I don't manage cash flow, I just produce the numbers, George manages
you know,
that.
our other.
You're a bookkeeper then?
That's really neat. It kind of matches up with your
Not
tradition.
now.
and
Yeah,
your-
I was crazy.
Yeah.
It is wrong.
Not John.
That is cool.
Yeah.
We're everything.
Pretty much everything.
Right.
No.
He's nice, whatever. This one's,
Yeah, that's really, that's about it, it's taxes. You have children, it's the taxes, it's the only benefit. But then, you know what, it's even the way around there, you have two, split them, and each buy your own tax.
Don't send it because you're gonna need it in a month and a half.
Other
It was Elvis. He got the report in there.
Elvis Smith.
Better than you.
What they live up in there, and get
Yeah, I mean,
my mother-in-law and
there you go. It was my
Let's take a couple more minutes and we'll get back together and chat.
What are the years? So 6 was total. Seven with the judge. My mom says like, just text the coffee was no text. She says, coffee, let me know what's done. And I said, okay. We did a cell phone, so I go to
Last year was
the
actually better.
or the, you know what I mean? So, nice. That's why Mike and I got married on 2015. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is, he just says Friday the 13th. You know, that ribbon's aware. Married on Friday. But it helps him Friday the 13th.
I have
We only have some of our customers.
set here with a reoccurring reminder.
It's
You
better.
have the end. I'm really good at numbers. I just had that as a kid. As a minor, they have, I knew the holiday now, I'm on track, so maybe somebody how to do that.
Oh, really?
I'm listening to them. I have everybody in my family, all my brother, my dad. It's all, oh yeah, well,
Here's the thing,
some teachers and that's all. And I still don't know something that hard. You're hard.
I know
At least you'll look it up when he's up and running.
some is there, once in spring, once in summer, once in fall. So they also, they all have,
Yes, that has a little trigger.
There you
go. Yeah, fly out because they have under those certain Friday or Saturday or something. That'll take 5 minutes. Yeah, that's cool.
All right. Let's hear your ideas. What would you do in this situation? What did you come up with? What are your thoughts? Run? Lock the door? Anybody got thoughts they want to share? What do you do looking at your cash flow? Where would you start? I heard somebody say deposits. So what about deposits? Obviously they're good, right? We want them.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But what specifically were you saying, Becky, about deposits?
We like to get those up front.
Okay, so all right. That's a little different than I thought. So upfront deposits.
And then the cost is,
Say again.
track the cost of the job.
So you got a projected cost, and then you're tracking as the project is going on. Okay. Okay. What else? Thoughts back here? Okay. History. History can be very useful. Not always, but can be. The only problem I think about when I think about history is then you get hit with a year like 2009 and who knows what's going to happen, right? But it's certainly a good place to start. Yeah.
Sales forecasting, tracking. Setting goals.
So you said two different things. You said goal and forecast. So I'm curious. In your business, is this different than this?
it's not, but the results seem to be different.
Yeah.
Like the goal is the forecast, but it doesn't usually match up. It's higher one month, lower another month. So
Right.
that bounces around.
Sure. What I was actually thinking here is I was wondering if you hold your internal team to a higher number than maybe you're thinking about to manage cash flow to make sure that you don't hit the rocks. That's kind of what I was thinking about there. Anybody else? Sure.
In addition to those, obviously, what I've always done the forecast is you look at, and I don't know how you want to put it up there, but look at how many new clients or customers do I typically add each year? What's my retained rate on repeat business?
So,
and I take that
okay,
into
so you're
consideration.
separating like recurring revenues. I can count on this every
Yep.
year, and then I want to add 10 new customers, say, just as an example. And
Well, I don't necessarily say I want to. What is my average each year? I usually get 10 new customers a year, and the average is $5,000 each, or, whatever.
Okay.
And I take that into consideration. In addition to other history and sales forecasts.
Yeah, okay, so that's good. Another hand over here, yeah.
Just making sure that we're looking at the pricing structure, so
Okay,
the
pricing.
operational costs versus variable costs, because that will majorly affect the forecast of projects. They go more smooth or less smooth depending on materials and labor and then what it costs to run the business.
Very good, John. So, follow-up question on that one. Do you understand
How much you need to have in revenue so that you're at least covering your fixed costs?
When we're operating inside of known structures, we do a good job at knowing what our pricing structure should be and knowing the theory behind it. It's when we get into projects that are a stretch where there's either subs outside of our control or there's just usually it's time actually, like we don't get the thing at the time we plan to.
Sure.
And then it starts
becomes less
stretching. So
predictable.
it's the pricing thing matching project management, like you guys were saying, you track the project as it goes.
Yeah.
Making sure that those two things line up seems to be the biggest puzzle for me. Just trying to make sure that I'm tracking with reality, so the forecast ends up being one.
You brought up this idea of your fixed versus variable costs, so you gotta pay your rent and you
Yeah.
got whatever truck payments. I don't know what's going on
Yeah,
in your business,
totally.
but there's a certain amount of cash that you have to have
Just to keep the doors open.
just to keep the doors
Yeah.
open. So it's this concept of what's your break-even sales. So
Yeah.
what do I have to sell for, and you could say a year, but that's a little risky. You better know it in a little shorter term so you don't have all those situations where you come up short in
Totally,
cash flow.
totally.
Yeah, so that's good too. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. If you're trying to new,
It's always fun to do something new, right? But
right, until it isn't, right?
Right.
Until it gets out of control. All right, good stuff. Anybody else with thoughts on cash flow forecasting?
Quit buying things.
What's that? Quit buying things.
Yeah.
Well, watch your spending, right?
Yeah, watch your spending.
Yeah.
Don't buy a $80,000 skid steer. 2 jobs coming, and then you spent all the project cost money on your skid steer.
Well, to the last thing we were just talking about too, you gotta make sure your fixed costs aren't rising on you. Control spending.
So both of those last 2, 3, whatever, I'll kind of go back to budget. Set your budget up, right? And
Yeah.
you kind of know what your number is, and you know what you have set aside for spending and for
You guys are setting me up so well. This is great. No, this is good stuff. guys should be teaching this class. All right, well, let's go over my list of ideas here. You can just pass it around. If we need more back there, I do have more up here. I think there's 15 or so in there. I'll just kind of go down through here and talk. And you guys definitely, yeah, there's sort of zigzag there. You guys definitely hit on a lot of it with your comments here, but I always like to point out whenever you see, if you go out on whatever, Microsoft or some big company and you look at their cash flow statement, the first line on there is always profit, and I say there's a reason for that. It's the most important thing. We talked about it in some different ways here. Understanding your costs, understanding your fixed and variable costs, your pricing. And obviously your pricing is dependent on the market. I know you guys are in competitive markets. From working with Steve, I get that. But what can you do? And are you bringing new things to the market that you can price higher for and so forth? But profitability, understanding your costs, your margins, your fixed costs, those are all important. So, you know, it kind of starts with profitability. But well, let's talk about number 2. So, market pricing, right? It's a constant challenge. So, we brought up over here, you know, what we're projecting out, we think we have a clear understanding of what our pricing is to be on this project and understanding your costs. Somebody else mentioned they try new work and the project can get away from them if they're not tracking it. I don't know if it's possible, maybe not, but you go back to your customers and say, this isn't what we thought it was. I'm sure that's not a happy conversation, but sometimes you gotta do that to manage your profitability. If you go to the back, the last page, and I apologize, it's kind of small, but if you look at the cash flow forecast that I handed out, this is just an example, and I said you guys were setting me up perfectly because this is a short-term cash flow forecasting tool that I tend to use more with companies that are having cash flow issues, but you start out with your bank balance, so you know what that is, and then what do you expect to come in? And I realize that this is, the pushback I typically get here is projecting deposits is really hard, but you can use history. You can also use dates when payments are due. You can, deposits are maybe a little more predictable because they're up front, but over time, you can start to get this, get your deposits and your payments down pretty pat because you have history, you know when things are due. But it starts with that, and then I break out the cash flow into 3 different areas: payroll and things that are driven by payroll. And the reason I put that first under the money going out is because, and I put brackets around it so you know which direction it's going, is that's the one thing you don't want to not do, right? You stop paying people, they're going to stop showing up. I happen to know from working with Steve and the company that it's hard as hell to keep people employed in your business today. I just heard a story about somebody plowing snow once and never showing up again. So believe me, the last thing you want to do is not pay them because you can't. So payroll to me and those things, you got to cover those first. And then the second category would be fixed. Like I said, we were just talking about, these are things that have to be paid no matter what. I can't possibly, not make these payments. And then you get down to your more variable things. What can I potentially not do this week so that I make sure I make payroll, or make sure that my sales taxes are being paid? Things, the bank is getting their loan payment. I have, if you step down here towards the bottom of that list under number 1, considerations for improving cash flow, these are my thoughts on this subject. And A, B, and C are in order for a reason. I didn't put it in here, but pay your people on time, and then pay your taxes on time, and anything else you owe the government, pay your loan payments on time, and then your vendor invoices. Point being is, you don't want to stop, you never want to not pay your people, right? I hope it never comes to that, but that's why we're here today, is to make sure that never happens and you got plenty of cash. And then the second thing is, and believe it or not, I've seen this, it's never a good idea to not pay the government. I know it sounds like, well, I can take care of that later. Trust me, you don't want to do that, because what happens is they're just like a machine, right? They don't care. You just didn't pay them, and all of a sudden penalties and interest and things like that come on. So I definitely put that as a strong number 2. I had a guy once decide that for a quarter it was a good idea not to pay his payroll taxes. And he was in a you-know-what storm for months on end, and actually it turned into years. So, and then the bank and vendor invoices. But, just keep that in mind as sort of a pecking order. More importantly, if you go down to the bottom, have a rainy day fund if possible so that it doesn't happen. And this should help you do that. At the bottom, at the end of the 13 weeks, so this represents a quarter, is my cash going up? In this example here, this is a company I worked with a long time ago. They're adding $60,000 of cash over this quarter, and they're going up. So that's what you want to see. And I can tell you with 100% certainty by projecting it, you will get better because you're paying attention to it before it happens to you. So I highly recommend this sort of approach. It doesn't need to be this many lines or this complex, but if you kind of think about it in that way, it's very helpful. I clearly define your payment terms. I actually overheard, I think, what's your name? Jeff, in the blue here. I heard you talking about make it clear on your invoices when things are due. Absolutely. It seems so simple, right? But I think it's important. Make sure that your customers and you understand your payment terms. Deposits. I've actually done work with these folks over here in my yard, and I know you want deposits. I get it. It makes a lot of sense to me. Great practice. So just, the one thing that's never going to go away is payroll and rent and utilities. Those things aren't going to go away. Just remember, they're there. Those are those fixed expenses. Very predictable. So now you've defined your payment terms. How long are they paying in? Know that. Let's say you have net 30 terms, whatever it is, and you get a quarter into the year and you realize everybody's paying you in 40 or 45, which I know happens a lot, mail, whatever it is. Just understand that and either forecast and be prepared to address it, or have your office manager, your accounting folks, whoever it is, get on the horn and collect your outstanding receivables. Before that, who's got a written credit and collections process? Anybody? Do you?
We have a lien process.
Say
we have a lien process written into the contract aspect. So
Okay.
the collections it's not. I mean, it's probably not perfect, but
Yeah.
we have it. They get it, along with their receipt for payment, and
Yep.
it's on the it's connected to the invoice and stuff.
Right, okay. That is good. I mean, it's not that easy to do with homeowners, and I understand that, but I guess to the best of your ability, using banks and credit agencies and the reputation of your customers, try to understand who you're extending credit to, or don't do it. You can always take a deposit and then do on receipt. I think those terms, maybe have lost some. Well, maybe they've regained some validity in the world, but if you don't have to, because it comes down to when you put $1 into the business, how long until you get it back out, right? Because you got to buy inventory, you got to pay your people. Well, one way to get some of that back is to have longer terms with your vendors. It's an option. Steve, he's probably not around right now, but there's an equation here where you can figure out how many days you're holding on to inventory, how many days it's taking your customers to pay you, and then how long are you taking to pay your vendors. Well, that's going to tell you how many days in total that when you put $1 in before it comes out the back in. It's called cash conversion cycle. So just make sure you understand these things. Somebody mentioned spending control, especially in a smaller business. Have a personal budget. Don't have to treat your business like an ATM. to support your personal lifestyle, because that can be tough on the business. I understand when you're a privately held business and you have full control of it, it's hard not to do that. But to the extent you can, in your mind, separate those two things. You can incent customers to pay sooner with discounts. Now, I would recommend you have to build that into your pricing and your margin to the extent you can, but it's pretty common to get a point or two. It's common to pay a point or two if you need to get the cash earlier for 10 days. It's not really a financial windfall, but if your cash flow recommends it, you might have to do that. And if you build it in your margin, they're paying for it anyway. This one's a little more involved, but how much inventory are you buying and what's the demand for the product? Now, I understand, and you're somewhat in a fad and fashion business if you're in the masonry and landscape world, and who knows what customers are going to want this year. Hopefully, Steve's vendors are helping drive that. But, inventory that sits around is a pile of cash. Steve's heard me say this, like, he probably hears it as nightmares because I bother him about it all the time. But it is literally a pile of cash. When you put $1 in inventory, that's all it's doing is occupying cash. And what you want to do is get it into your customers' hands and, showing nicely in their homes and their office buildings, commercial side of things. Careful on the debt side. Most of the banks are going to look at this anyways when they look at your financial statements, but you really don't want to have more than twice your equity in the business in debt. If it gets any higher than that, most banks won't loan to you anyways, but that's something to watch too. So what's your total loan value and how much equity do you have in the business? It's a pretty simple calculation. Talked about the terms of tools for managing cash flow. We already talked about the 13-week cash flow budget. Somebody else brought up the idea of budgeting. I'm a big fan of it. And so when you have your financial statements, it may seem like, why would I do that? I'll just get my tax returns once a year and figure out how much I made. I recommend against that. I recommend you're looking at this monthly, especially during the peak of your business year. And I just can't. I mean, I'm a financial guy, so it's easy for me to think this way. But I think it's really important to know how your business is tracking against what you projected to do. You just talked about some months are going to be up, some months are going to be down. You're going to have good years, you're going to have bad years, but you should know it, right? How am I doing as the year goes through? I mean, why wait until March 15th or March 30th to find out how you did? And oh, by the way, here's your tax bill too. These are other things you have to plan for in your cash flow. So I'm a big fan of having a budget, even if it's just a simple high level one, do it on a monthly basis. If you look at there's a sheet in there with some big writing and ratios on it. Look at that for a second. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. These are just some balance sheet ratios that are good to look at. The first one is current ratio. So that's just your current assets over your current liabilities. So you want it to be at least 1 or higher so that you have enough cash to cover your current obligations, which is accounts payable, debt payments less than a year, credit cards, these types of things. You'd like to have it significantly higher than 1, then you've got a rainy day fund, you've got some liquidity in your business is the word that you'll hear. Accounts receivable days, AKA is days sales outstanding. So this is how you calculate how long your customers are taking to pay you, and is it reasonably close to your terms? Great. Same thing on the other side. How long are you taking to pay your vendors? Are you paying within or without terms? And I think we all know that you better stick pretty close to your terms or it's going to be hard to keep getting credit. Inventory days, that's how you calculate how many days in inventory you have. I don't really know what a good number is for your business, but you should know that. And you can Google your industry and find out how many days of inventory you should have on hand. I'm guessing most of you don't carry a lot of it, but it's something to consider. And it's those three things that become the cash conversion cycle, which if you look back at the first sheet is the days sales outstanding plus the days inventory on hand minus the days payable. So how long are your customers holding your money? How many days of inventory do you have minus how long you're taking to pay your vendors? That's going to tell you in days how long when you put $1 in the business that you're getting it back. And then return on assets, this is an easy one, net income over total assets. So what percentage of return are you getting on your investment and whatever your equipment and building and assets are? So just some thoughts on different ratios you can look at there as it relates to cash flow. And then the last couple of things are obviously to you and or your office manager, your accounting team, understand your aging report. When it comes down to the aging report, if you're chasing $1 that's 90 days old and you got a $10,000 or $100,000 debt that's getting ready to go past 30, I might spend a little more time collecting the 100,000 than I would the $1 or $2 that's 90 days old. So you got to look at both the age and the dollars of it, just as something to share with your accounting folks. And then lastly, having an operating line of credit is good news and bad news. If you got enough cash in your business to where you don't need one, fantastic. But if you do, it can help you manage growth, because the first thing you do when you're growing and you're going to get new businesses, you got to go out and get the capital and buy the inventory and hire people and so forth. But don't live in it. It should be a short-term tool for you. Questions, thoughts on cash flow? That helpful? I know. Yep. I got two more sections like this. Probably go a little quicker. The next one should. It's on securing a bank loan. So if you go to the first sheet again and look at number 2, current versus desired.
Can I back up? On
Yes.
Cash flow.
Yes, sir.
What do you recommend a small 1 to 5 person company do for some Excel spreadsheet?
Yep.
Or just QuickBooks do this?
QuickBooks gives you a nice report after
Right,
it's
after
historical, but I prefer what I showed you there is a spreadsheet. Yeah, I would. I would just do it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that detailed, but it can be if you want it to be. However, it's easiest for you to manage. And you know what? I can email you my copy of that. You're welcome to have it. It ain't rocket science, but the management of it takes some diligence and focus. Okay, desired situation is to support the profitable growth of the business. Hopefully you're all going to grow this year. The company wants to secure an operating line of credit and an equipment loan. What are the benefits of that? Well, you can go out and buy the inventory, hire the people, and buy the equipment you need to go get to work. Current situation is you're growing too fast, your business is seasonal, and I know these things to be true about the industry you're in, especially Minnesota. You need more liquidity in the business like we talked about. So your current balance sheet, you don't have enough cash. Every business goes through this when they first start, of course. So you need capital. You can't wait for 45 days for your customers to start paying. So the question is, and let's hold it to 5 minutes this time. This one's maybe a little more straightforward. What does the bank want to see from the company to support a potential loan for the equipment and a revolving line of credit? So just take like 5 minutes and make a list of what you think a bank might want to see to give you a loan. I'll go back and get it.
is Hedberg Bank.
Okay, that's right. You're a Wi-Fi password? Yeah.
Go on to Hedberg, one more Hedberg internal, and then password Hedberg, capital H, rocks, capital R, O, 0, and the S is a dollar sign. Do you want me to write it out for you? No, I think I got it. Okay.
That's pretty.
And I thought
Oh, there they are.
well, the enemy is turn the fan on our paperwork.
It's pretty cruel.
It was awesome. But I'm a super dyslexic, so I was talking about conversion and went out there. It was good.
What class are you in that you're a big team?
It was just like it was called debate and discussion. It wasn't like
All right.
a classic debate.
I get you.
But in like a classroom format.
Who's got thoughts
So I was
on
wondering, yeah.
what matters in getting a bank loan? Probably have some experience. What do you think the bank wants to see?
Debt to income ratio?
They won't tell you what it is unless they don't like it. Then they'll tell you. What else? Yeah. Tax returns, probably. 26 years. Usually they want to see 3 years of tax return. What else?
The balance sheet.
Yep. And if they know you're doing it monthly, like we were talking about before, they're gonna be, you're already ahead of the game. Believe it or not, there's so many businesses that couldn't, like, I think this is the balance sheet, so I'm gonna say internal financial statements. What else?
Contract, recurring revenue.
Yeah, you've been consistent on that one. That, you know, if you could show a bank that would absolutely give them confidence in your forecast. So, I'll say revenue breakdown. Now, every bank is going to tell you they care about the relationship. At the end of the day, what do they want to make sure? They're going to get paid. I mean, that's, you know, it's black and white. It is what it is. Now, some of them really are good at the relationship side. Those are the banks I like to work with, but the fact is they want to make sure they're going to get paid. So if we can say, you know, 85% of my revenue recurs every year, and here's how it breaks down, and this is our growth goals, and here's how we think we're going to get that, and here's the strategy. So let's jump into here. If you guys would run these around. These. Like that. kind of right off the top is, I think a lot of people, if you're not, I deal with banks all the time, it's what I do, but if you're not comfortable being in front of a bank, what you should be comfortable is just talking about your business. I mean, I think that's bigger than it gets credit for, and that maybe even equally as important that you care about your business, that you have a plan, that you're not just rolling the dice every year, that that this is your life, this is what you do. They want to know that you give a crap. I mean, honestly, I think that's really important. So share your story. How did you get there? Where are you going? Why is it important to you? What are your long-term goals? So I say share them. I have a checklist that occasionally, sometimes people just want to talk to one bank, and that's fine. I prefer a process where you're talking with multiple banks, because when you do that and they know it, then they know they're competing for your business like anything else. If you're going out to buy, whatever, rocks, you're gonna, you want to have some competition for your business. Same thing with banks. So you want to talk about the opportunity. Hey, I've got the chance to grow by $1 million this year because they're putting this new 1,000-unit single-family home development out in wherever. That's my opportunity, but I need this piece of equipment. I need to buy this inventory. So tell them what you're after. What are you going to use the cash for? The company and its history. Well, my dad started this business when he was, 28 years old and 19, whatever. But give them the history, and if it's been in your family, those kinds of things. What's the industry looking like? I think they want to know that you're somewhat of you understand your industry and what you're up against competitively. What's your strategy to serve the industry? That can be really local, or it can be, this is what's happening around the country in my industry. Talked about interim financial statements, somebody brought that up. Income statement, also known as a P&L, profit and loss, and a balance sheet. That, like I said, if you're doing those monthly and year to date, you can share those with the bank. I think they're going to be impressed, especially if they're accurate. That's, a consideration I run into, as you would probably guess. And then what's the company done over the past year or two? And why is this year going to be different, good, bad, or indifferent? So the forecast, we talked about having a budget for your income statement and balance sheet. And all the statement of cash flows comes from the P&L and balance sheet. Like I said, at the bottom of the P&L, the income statement, how much profit did you make? And then what happened on my balance sheet? Well, I bought more inventory, whatever it is. That's what the cash flow statement is. So they want to see a projection. They're always going to want to see your corporate and personal tax returns. For the past 3 years, I'm guessing most of you have flowed through entities and aren't C Corps, S Corps, LLCs, those kinds of things where the income flows through you personally. They want to see both sides of the tax return, even though there's no tax on the business technically. And then the personal financial statements for the owners. That's kind of, the blocking and tackling, black and white. So be honest with the bank. There's no sense in surprising them down the road. If you had a hiccup in the past year or two, tell them, explain to them how it happened, what you learned from it, etc. Like I said, I'm a fan of shopping multiple banks for the same reason you would shop any other, type of vendor. And if you go to the second page of this is a scorecard that I put together a number of years ago, working with a client that was actually looking for a pretty big line of credit, a $5 million line of credit. And we talked to, frankly, too many banks, but we needed a way to be objective about it, and I think this provides some objectivity. The first thing, though, is what's important to you. So these factors on the left, for this particular company, the number one thing is if they're going to put financial covenants in, like somebody mentioned debt to equity ratio, I want to know what they are, and I want to be comfortable that they're not going to be crippling to my business. So that was the number one thing for them. So we put the very highest weight on that, and then you give them a score of 1 to 5, and it calculates out over here. This is a spreadsheet again, and these are different things. They didn't want to have really aggressive personal guarantees. The rate, you can see all these things. This is for you to fill out. What's important to you? What do you care about? That's what it was for this company, but it provides an objective way. And so what we did is we tallied these scores for everybody, and 3 banks kind of rose to the top with their scores. And then we met with all of them again, and then it got down to softer things like, do I like this person who's going to be my everyday banker, and some of these things. And I actually don't think they picked the bank with the highest score, but they were comfortable with them. They'd worked with them in the past, and it came down to it, but they were in the top 3. So this provides a nice way to kind of be objective about it. Okay, and then the last thing is on the equipment and the hard asset side, that this is where they don't care as much about your cash flow per se. They want to know that this equipment is going to be productive. So my suggestion is understand what you're going to get. Jeff, you brought up the idea of buying a new piece of equipment, or not sort of doing it off the cuff. I would agree with you. That's probably not a good idea. Figure out what you're expecting this piece of equipment to return to your business in terms of cash flow. I mean, at the end of the day, cash flow is a big deal. So let's go to the last couple of questions, which we're going to do together. Well, before I leave that, sorry, anything else on the bank loan? Hopefully you don't need one because your business is spitting out so much cash you can afford to run without one. Okay, so we're going to cover 3 and 4. These are, like you said, we could spend a week on cash flow. I agree with that. So now we're going to jump to a little bit longer term. So number 3, and we're going to work these together. This will be the last section here. The desired situation is from an outsider's perspective. So let's say somebody wants to buy your company. Company value is greater than the owner's financial needs in the next phase of life. Great, right? So I've done my diligent investing outside the business. My business is worth whatever, and it's more than I need in retirement. In fact, I'll probably pass them on to my kids. Well, that's a great thing, right? You're probably sleeping well at night. But the current situation is maybe not. You're curious about the real value of the company, and you're not sure that if you were to sell it, it would give you enough to meet your retirement needs and your personal financial needs and those of your family. So the question here to consider is, how do we determine business value? And how do you determine long-term personal financial requirements? The two are tied, right? Well, they're an important equation here. And then number 4 is, okay, we're past that. We've transitioned away. The company's not dependent on me specifically for the operations anymore. Results remain strong, and you're good on the personal side. Obviously, that's what a situation I think we'd all like. But the reality is, today you're weighed down by the day-to-day responsibilities. The business, like you come back from vacation and you're like, what happened? Did a tornado hit this place? You don't want that. And you're unsure how to get out of the business. So these two, for obvious reasons, go in tandem. How do you value a business, and what are the different options for a successful exit? So this is kind of the long term and the end game as you're thinking about the value of your business. So let's take another, probably a little more than 5 minutes. This is kind of heavy stuff. Think about those 2 questions. So how do you determine business value? How do you know if you have enough in retirement? And then what are my options for a successful exit? So we'll go somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes and put some thoughts down about that, and then we'll get back together and wrap up.
Oh, that's right. I knew that. Okay. So they can do anything on it. So he didn't sell it. He didn't really do it. He use it. Okay. Yeah.
All right, can we regroup? So, question one, how do you determine business value? What's my company worth? Any ideas, thoughts?
Cash, cash value is one of them. Sell everything and see what you can work with. One way.
So, I think what you're talking about is liquidation, right?
Liquidation.
Yep, okay.
Have an auction.
Yep, all right, got it. That's great. That is certainly an option, maybe not the most highest value one, but it is absolutely an option. What else? So you had,
The other one is based on, you value it based on the profit loss, the net value, and it's multiplied by like 8 to 10. And that's generally, isn't that generally what the value is?
8 to 10, that'd be a good number.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
it be?
It'd be really
Hopefully.
good. Well, depending on your industry.
Right, yep.
Okay, so multiples of, you said profit, I'll say cash flow, but you're right on. If you're making a lot of money, multiples of profit is a good thing. And that's obviously gonna bring a higher value. All right, good. What about the personal side? What are you worth? You guys all,
A good management team in place.
okay, hold on, that, yes. Hold that thought, but what I'm saying is, you need, what the value of your business comes down to is what's your whole, what are you worth? You know, what does your personal balance sheet look like? Do you guys all have a good feel for that? Do you have an investment advisor, or do you do it on your own and you know exactly what your assets are worth, your house, your investments, your cars, all those things? Are you keeping track of that? Do you know what you need in retirement? So those are the kinds of things that I think you have to know, because your business is one of your assets, but it's worth something. But what do you have outside of it? What's the total nut you need in retirement? But I agree. So now back to what you were just talking about. Back to the business value. So you mentioned, I think you said
Management team.
Management team. Okay, good one.
Reoccurring business.
Yep, absolutely.
I think looking at whether or not businesses like yours can be sold to someone else and operated, or if you're in a business that requires you as in this part of the question you're asking, if the owner has to be.
That's a really good one. I don't get that very often, but you're absolutely right.
So it'd be like a market analysis on whether or not you're running a business that could be sold. Like if you ran like a vending machine company with one person, you might be able to sell that really easily, but like a big cultural company kind of can be overvalued
That's a
to
great
you.
one. Absolutely.
So ownership relationships, I guess, or.
Yep. Are they transferable too, or is it so centric on the owner that it's going to be
easier
tough?
to sell a company where the owner doesn't know all their customers personally,
Yep.
right?
That they don't own the relationship exclusively.
Right.
Yeah. That's another really good one.
A service company is really hard to sell because it is relational, but like a robot company is easy to sell because it's just mechanics. Or, you know, like automated systems are easier. But who wants to run a robot company?
Those are really good ones.
That's why you should really get it set.
How familiar are you guys with different ways to exit your business? Go on. You can sell it. I got a list here, but you can sell it. You can sell it to your management team, or you can have your family members buy you out. You can do an ESOP. We can talk a little bit about that. That's the raise buy it from you, typically at a little lower price. You can liquidate it. Not ideal, probably, unless you want to get out of the business. You know, it's like, I don't want my kids to have to deal with this. It's not worth it. Okay, let's last set of sheets here, if you wouldn't mind, just rubbing those around the table. Steve's gonna get the hook out and pull me off. Oh, we got a volunteer here. I wish I didn't have to wear these damn things, but I do. So, as these are coming around, let's start out talking about consideration for business value and in conjunction with your personal financial needs. I'm assuming you guys are all business owners. So, Jeff, you brought it up. Many, I would say most business valuations are done as a multiple of EBITDA. Now, EBITDA is, last year, I think George Norling knew exactly what it was because he knew what it was. But EBITDA stands for earnings, so profit before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a really fancy word for cash flow. Because that's really what, and you raised that, you said cash flow, absolutely. That's what the buyer wants to know they're going to get, and how, and the multiple then, somebody else brought that up, is how sustainable is that? And that's where you get into things like the strength of your management team. And believe it or not, they've got to be able to see it in your financial statements. So go back to the beginning when I said, I think it's smart to have internal financial statements that are accurate. That's why. Because at the end of the day, somebody from the outside has to tell you if they believe your business is really worth that. Is that cash flow that you're showing me, is it real? And believe me, there's a whole industry of people who will sit there and take that down to a very detailed level. So timely and accurate internal financial statements, that they know you're looking at them, you understand where you are versus your plan, etc. Systems are and by systems, I do mean IT systems, but I also mean your processes within your business. Do you have good processes? Things like you're projecting the cost of a customer job. You know what the price is going to be because you told them, right? And you got a deposit on that. Now, are we tracking our costs? That's a good process to follow to run your business so that it's profitable. So I'm talking about, do you have good IT systems, and do you have good processes? Both of those are important. It's, you know, a good history. So every year I've been profitable, and I've been adding a little bit more. You don't have concentration with one customer. The problem with concentration is it's great while everything's good, but what it gives the customer or the vendor, if it gets too high, and I would say 20% is a good measure, 20 to 25. If you get a customer or a vendor that has more than 25% of your business, it becomes risk. Because what happens is, and I've seen it so many times where, hey, guess what? We need a 10% price decrease, and you are in no position to give them a 10% price decrease, but you don't have a choice because they're 40% of your business. You don't want to get into that position where you have no leverage. So it doesn't mean that you should stop doing business with that customer, but it probably means you should be working harder to grow around them. Easier said than done. All I'm trying to tell you is these things are important when you go to value your business. And these things here in this third bullet, that's what determines your multiple. So when you said 8 to 10, on average, companies that have these things sell 4 to 6. So that's why I said 8 to 10 is a really good multiple. Now there are what I would call outliers, like technology, software. I know a guy named Prairie who sold a security software business. He wasn't making any money. He was plowing money into development, but he sold it for 18 times his recurring revenue. That industry is just wacky. It's an outlier. You can't expect that in a hard goods industry. And I'm not an investment banker, but I'll tell you it's more likely to be 4 to 6 if you're profitable than it is. And that's even with all these things. But And clean legal history, obviously you don't want to have any pending employee cases or environmental situations, or whatever the case may be. They will be found by the potential buyer. But if you have these things and you're profitable and you have good cash flow, you probably have a pretty valuable business. And the other thing is, when they look at these things and they say, yep, good management team, business runs pretty well when they're not there, statements, all these things, they're going to say, this is pretty, we can predict that this business is going to continue to be what it's been in the past. And that's really what they're looking for, is a company that they can take, and then they can add on whatever they're going to do. Growth, cost, a lot of times it's cost cutting, whatever the case may be. But a third-party buyer is going to be, is going to treat it like that. So here are some other types of business valuations you brought up. Liquidate, that's the first one on my list. Not ideal. Typically, you're selling for pennies on the dollar for what you invested, but an asset sale, I've seen businesses sell for, hey, just take over my bank debt and my credit card debt, whatever it is, and you can have the business for that. I've seen that happen again. That's probably not your highest value. A recapitalization, so that would be where somebody would come in and give you a value on the business and become an equity investor. You could either do that from a minority position or a majority position. I think the bigger you get, the more likely is, everybody's heard of a private equity firm. It's a group of private investors who put their money together and they buy businesses. They'll do these recaps sometimes, but they're going to want majority control of the business. They're probably not going to be okay being in a minority position. Maybe they will, but it all comes down to the valuation and what they're willing to pay. But that way you can take some money off the table and maybe stay in the business, be on the board, that kind of thing. I doubt any of you are big enough to go sell to public stock, but it's an option. Employee stock. So that's where your group of employees, and this is usually for companies that have 50 or more employees, but and there's a whole process around this, but the way it works is they go to the bank and the business has all these things, financial statements and history, etc. And the bank will say, okay, we'll loan you this over 5 or 10 years, and so the owner gets the payments over 5 or 10 years, and then the employees, a certain number of shares, and the employees get bonuses. It's a really cool way to get ownership down to the quote-unquote factory floor level. I'm on the board of a company that's structured this way. It's pretty cool. I mean, I can go out, they manufacture electric motor parts, I go out and talk to any one of the employees, and it's incredible what they know about how successful, how the business is doing. Or you can have a manager or a partner buy you out. So there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. This is if you're selling your business. You can also, where I put management or partners, your family members can buy you out. Usually still requires a valuation. So what can you do to increase the value of your business? Well, you can take that list up here and probably drop it down, but have monthly financial statements prepared, whether you have an office manager, someone like me, a CPA, somebody looking at your statements and making sure they're accurate and they're coming out on a timely basis. So many companies get them 2-3 months later, or like I said, just once a year from the tax folks, which is not really a great projection of how your business is actually doing on a monthly basis. CPAs will do reviewed and audited financials. Those are different levels: audit, review, compiled financials, all those things. They're making sure your revenues and the expenses are reported in the proper period. And that stamp of approval on your internal financial statements actually is very valuable when it comes to a third-party buyer, because you can say, look, I've had CPAs review this, and I'm, I got a good report. Consistent revenues, you have consistently brought up recurring revenues. Those are a big deal because, like I said, they want to see sustainable numbers, and recurring revenues are a good indicator of that. Strong brand, a management team. So one way to test this is to leave for a while, go on vacation, and see how the business runs. I happen to know George does that, and the place doesn't fall apart thanks to you gals. So that's a good sign there. Consistent financial trends, so cash flow. This last one is a little bit different of a concept, but the idea is as you're growing, you're not increasing your fixed costs, so your profitability is expanding as your sales grow. I mean, that's like, you know, high cotton there. So what's gonna hurt you? Problems on the balance sheet, inventory write-offs, any surprises? Oh yeah, I do have that environmental situation. I work with a couple of dry cleaning businesses. Terrible environmental situation. There's a whole super fund set up for dry cleaners. You don't want those to come out later. Most people in the industry understand that, but so negative surprises, or you know, oh gosh, it looks like that customer's not gonna pay me that $100,000, things like that. If you're running the business exclusively to reduce the tax liability, which a lot of CPAs historically have told owners to do, and you don't have good internal financial statements that are CPA reviewed, you're probably not maximizing your cash flow and your EBITDA, because you're, you know, going out and buying a piece of equipment because the accountant told me to, because I can get all this depreciation. Well, did you need it? Or was the business growing? You know, these kinds of questions. Concentration on one or two customers, or relying on tax returns as your financial statement. Let's go to the last page. If you don't know personally where you stand, I think it's important, because there's going to be a gap in between. Hopefully it's a positive gap, but usually when you think, okay, I'm going to find out my business is worth this and I need this in retirement, there's a gap there. And frankly, that's the kind of thing I do, is I try to help people fill in that gap, is make my business more valuable. If I had to say one thing that I do, that's what I try to do. But you need to know what realistically you and your family need in retirement, whatever it is. And I would also argue that with that, you need to know what you're going to do in retirement, because I have seen people that I've worked with sell their business and then, so what am I going to do today? I got no idea. They get bored. Nobody wants to retire like that. So there's the financial side, and then, hey, what am I going to do when I retire? And dying at your desk, some people may want to do that, but most people don't. They want to retire and enjoy life for the last however many years. And then work the plan. You know, the earlier in life you can do all this, the better off you'll be when you go to sell your business. So yeah, that's kind of a recap on that. Again, you know, this is another topic that we could probably spend more than a week on. But for one, I don't want to bore you to tears. For two, we don't have a week. So that's what I got. Questions, thoughts, feedback, any other things you want to talk about? Yeah.
So, you personally work, you have your own business, I take it?
Yeah. Well, I'm a partner with a bunch of other people that do what I do. Yeah. So I'm an equity partner in a firm called B2B CFO that does this for companies under 50 million.
So I was just wondering, because I know you work with consultants on all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you do?
Yeah.
Basically?
I don't like that word though, because a consultant has this indication that I don't really care. I'm not really involved. I'm just going to come in and be a pigeon and leave droppings around and say clean that up, and then I'll come back and send you a bill. I mean, I guess the reason I say I don't like it is because what I do is I get in the business, even though I'm a contractor, I try to get in the business and really help people reach their goals. And sometimes it's identifying goals. You know, I do know a lot of business owners that are just, it's a job, time to make the donuts.
Right.
Shouldn't be like that. You know, if you own a business, you ought to be thinking strategically and long term about how you can make this thing you've created more valuable.
Yeah, I think a while back, there was a consulting firm basically that helps our industry, and they had a worksheet you could fill out. It was just a free worksheet thing that they did, so you get the score for where you're at with your business.
Yeah.
It was really helpful. So it did, a lot of these items, there's about 10 or 12 things, and you fill out all your.
So the resultants for business? Is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah, good guys. Yep, it's good to know.
And that's an eye opener, especially
Yeah.
for our industry, because it's a lot. there's a lot to do to get your store up and all those categories and all this stuff.
Well, it takes focus over a period of time because you can lose your mind when a 2009, 2010 happens and the industry just tanks on you. Or you can you can hunker down and continue to work your plan. But it's not easy to do. And everybody's chasing the same business because it's a smaller pie, and then when you get into a price haggle situation. So. But yeah, I do know those guys. They're good guys.
Can you talk about the times when you've seen an owner successfully transition out of their like kind
Sure.
of primary role and what it takes to create a structure that is that management team?
Sure. So the best example I can think of is a company here in town that I got involved with. I was introduced by like an executive business coach, about a $20 million wholesale distribution company. And the owner was a gal who started this company with nothing on the back of her car when she was like 35 years old. She got tired of being in banking and started this company. And about 5 years before that, first she hired that executive coach. She also had a really key person on her management team that understood just as well, and I would argue in some ways better than she did, how to run the business. And so they really had a two-headed monster and they both had their skills, but they understood what each other was good at. And then they developed another level of management that was equally good. And it was an industry where there was some turnover, more on the front lines of the business, but the two of them were really a powerful combination. She had hired him, gosh, she had the business for close to 35 years. She was almost 70 when she sold it.
Yeah.
And she had hired him maybe 25 years before, so he was in the business a long time. And that's where I say she was living her plan. She also knew what she and her husband needed and wanted in retirement. She was very clear on that. And it wasn't just financially, she also knew what she wanted to do. I talked about these non-financial things. She wanted to do charitable work. She plays in a banjo group. I don't know where that came from, but that's what she likes doing. But she knew what her life was going to look like after retirement. And it's not the easiest thing in the world, but in her mind it was clear. I think she's busier now after she sold the company. But bottom line is, there's a company in a similar industry about 10 times as large as her in Chicago that approached her in 2014 with, it wasn't even the numbers, it was the way they said they were interested in the company. And I was like, yeah, we should talk to them. So we did, and about a little longer, too many lawyers involved, but about 8 months later, the company was sold, and she's doing well. They took over, they had a good brand, but they kept the brand that was more of a local, so they've got both, and they've added products, and they continue to grow. They bought another facility and expanded. I mean, that's probably the best I can think of. And she had
vision, right? Like that's
she had been thinking about this for a long time. Yeah. And I give her a lot of credit. I don't know. I think she probably got this mindset because her dad was a successful entrepreneur back in the day, and she was in banking, so they tend to be really numbers focused and that kind of thing. But so that's really the best situation I can think of.
And you're gonna
honest, she left money on the table.
Yeah.
She could have sold it for a higher price. I even said to her, I'm like, gosh, you're leaving blank on the table here. And both her and her key person were like, yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
Sorry, you had.
Oh no, it just seems like a lot of things where, we're also busy running the day-to-days, but sometimes I think it's that time to reflect like a CEO and how much time and space you have on a yearly basis to think about that big picture strategy, and then going back to thinking about your operational needs and strategy. They're two different brains, right?
Well, and after 11 years of doing this, I Steve said it, but I was in public companies and that deal for a long time. But after doing this for almost 11 years, I do get that. You know, it's easy. And I really work hard not to be that guy that comes in and again, I know it's really valuable to fill out that scorecard, but I don't want to then leave and come back and go, well, why haven't you done this stuff? Well, I'm doing business, right? I got customers, and I do get that. I mean, and it doesn't, you can't just flip a switch and have it happen overnight.
Right.
You guys listen to me long enough, I'm pretty sure that, you know, they got things to look at and lunch, so I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys are really engaged. And Steve and Matt are appearing just at the right time, and there you go. I'm done. Thank you.